You're tuned in to CKLU 96.7, your radio, and this is your third edition of Crater Conversations. I'm your host, Jess, co-founder here at Our Crater, where we bring you news and entertainment for the social Sudburian. You can catch me every Sunday at 10 o'clock on CKLU 96.7 as I sit with a different Sudburian each week. We talk about their projects, their life here in the Nickel City, and we give a clear picture into how we live up here. If you want to catch up afterwards or re-listen, you can go to www.ourcrater.com. That's OURCRATER.com for the SoundCloud link. While you're at it, you can always look up Our Crater on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram, and you can always be up to date on the content we're posting all throughout the week. This time around, we're sitting down with Starlotte Dresen of Starlotte Satine Vintage. You've most definitely seen her on stage in any number of Sudbury burlesque performances, but over the last year or so, she's branched into selling vintage items. Her pop-up sales have been a big hit, and in September, she hosted her first big solo event at the Durham Hall Vintage. It was her Durham Hall Vintage Fashion Show. The event was a sellout, and with another record-breaking burlesque event just last weekend for the Strip to the Bone Monsters Ball 3. She's full in gear for her next show. This is the Vintage Cocktail Party at STC. In their Valet Cabaret Lounge. The event is in support of SDC and brings a one-of-a-kind selection of vintage costume pieces to light for the first time for your browsing pleasure. Listen in as we get to know a little bit more detail about how Starlotte Satine fell in love with vintage and a little bit about the showgirl life. We are here today in the CKLU studios with Starlotte Satine. You might know her from Sudbury Burlesque, where she performs often, obviously, as Starlotte Satine, but she also has a side business doing vintage clothing. So we're going to talk to you a little bit today about an upcoming event you have, but I also want to know kind of where the whole thing started. So can you tell us do you have a memory of where kind of your interest in vintage started?
Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited to be here, and my love for vintage has been since I was a little girl. I started seeing vintage mostly from my great-grandmothers. I was very lucky that both of my great-grandmothers have lived till they're 100, so I'm really excited that, I've gotten to see all the generations passed down in their clothing and their, toys and things like that. So that's where it all pretty much branched from, is just sitting in their houses and going through their stuff from when I was little.
Just kind of looking through all their treasures, all the things that they kept over the years.
Yeah, exactly.
Was there ever maybe a particular item that you can remember that really that you fell in love with? Maybe the first vintage item that you fell in love with?
Yeah, I brought it here with me today.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
It's this doll that has been hand sewn in my family, and it's reversible. And every time someone sees it, it's creepy because it has two heads, one head underneath the dress. It's really hard to talk about. I feel like you kind of have to
this is audio. We will take a picture of it.
But so she always had the same stuff all the time, and actually what I loved about going to my great-grandmother's place is that it always kind of just felt like a little time capsule, that nothing ever changed, when we would be kids growing up, until even when my great-grandma passed away recently. I went to her house and it's nothing changed. Everything was still there, and it's been years since I'd been back. So it's very nice to be able to take home something that means so much and is so reminiscent of my childhood, for sure.
So you have kind of been able to transition this kind of just interest and hobby in vintage and vintage clothing and vintage treasures, I guess, really. And you've kind of been able to parlay it into kind of doing all sorts of shows and sales and kind of a little bit of a private business. So how does that kind of all come about?
Well, it started off with the burlesque stuff, because when, being a burlesque performer, you're always shopping for vintage something that goes hand in hand, and I got sick of having to constantly go to Toronto and pay a lot of money to just buy a dress or whatever. So it started off with that, and my experience in theater and event stuff through, Sudbury Burlesque has really helped branch into the whole market of vintage and being able to come up with something. I never wanted to make a vintage business where people just shop. I always want to make it an experience so that people feel like they've gone back in time, because that's something that I really love and am passionate about. So, yeah.
So where do you find all these pieces that you're selling in your shows? Where do they all come from? How do you find all this stuff?
Well, it started off from a person in Sault Ste. Marie, and she owns a store called Winnie Bead's Vintage Emporium, and I started working in the movie industry a couple years ago, and I just met the right people at the right time, and just happened to be talking about how I was really sad that Sudbury doesn't have any vintage clothing, and then I met her, and she trusted me and just was like, I want to branch out and I want to sell. Sue's not doing well for the market right now, and she literally just brought a band of clothes to my house and said, here you go, good luck. And that was where it started. And then once we started doing these little pop-up events here and there around the city, then people started finding out about it and then asking me to take in their clothes, and then I started getting scouts like within the burlesque community too. There are a lot of vintage loving girls out there that keep eyes out for me, like they're always seeking clothing for me, and they see something that they know I'll love, they call me up and go, hey, I have these things. So at this point in the game, it's been a year and a half now almost, and people scout for me now, so it comes from all over Ontario. But yeah, a lot of it does actually come from Sudbury, but most of it's from all over.
I heard once that you had somebody that contacted you that they had a complete surplus of vintage items in a hotel. Can you tell us a bit about that? How do you sort through something like that?
Yeah, so that was my first big consignment option with this lady, and she came to my sale and she said, I have so much stuff and I don't know what to do with it all. And I said, okay, well, like, what do you mean by a lot, She's like, well, I live in this massive place and I don't know what to do with it. And I said, okay, well, we'll meet up and we'll go. And so I took my business partner with me, Morgan, and we went out to her place, and she lives in like an old hotel that's been converted into her home, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And I call her like a glorified shopaholic, because she just loves buying things, and she'll see something she loves and she'll pick it up. So she's still, like, now that we've even gone through all of her stock, she still ends up going out shopping and finding things. She's like, she'll send me pictures. Do you love this? I'll bring it home, So going through it, it's like Christmas every time I go to someone's house who says they have like a vintage treasure trove of things, because you never know what you're going to find, right? So, and she has great taste. So it's been like where most of the stock has actually come from is out in a stair. Out of all things, like, what are the odds, Who
knew that's where it would come from?
Yeah, pretty much.
So you're kind of, obviously you're very involved in the Sudbury Burlesque, and you travel a lot for doing different shows. You've kind of got a chance to travel all across Canada doing different performances, and you do this business on the side. Like, you have a lot on your plate. Yeah. How do you kind of balance this all? And, like, how does maybe the burlesque kind of play into the vintage clothing?
Well, it's been really great. The troupe leaders have let me, every time we do shows, they'll let me do like a booth, and I'll bring out the vintage clothing. So it kind of adds another element to the show. And a lot of the times, like, going and performing out of town, it's an excuse for me to go shopping too. And like, I'll bring a little bit of extra money to go out and like see if I can hit up a really unique thrift store, and I'll find like the unique places, and I'll go shopping. And I'm very picky on what I like to bring in. So yeah, so being busy is definitely a thing. It never seems to stop. Like, now that we're done the Halloween show for burlesque, it's like I'm full into this whole fall bridal show, fitting girls in vintage wedding gowns that the Sudbury Theatre Centre has, and then we're getting ready to do the Sudbury Theatre Centre fundraiser gala thing with the cocktail party. So yeah, it's just never slows down. I don't know how I do it. I just manage somehow. My life is clothes. Like, there's no going away. Like, you live that lifestyle, and there's no going back after that. Like, so
everywhere. Your apartment must be absolutely overrun.
Yeah, it's all clothes. I live in a big walk-in closet. That's my poor boyfriend.
He's very, very patient.
Yeah, very patient, and like he lives in it just as much as I do. So
So shout out to Jay.
Yeah, pretty much. Shout out to Jay for putting up with it all.
So I've heard you say before that when you're planning an event, you kind of want it to be more of an experience than just an event that you're going to. So you just wrapped up your first fashion show at the Durham Hall in September. So what were some of the elements that you kind of included in that event? How did that event all turn out?
Yeah,
that was really your first big undertaking as like a vintage.
Yeah, it was the big it was a big event, and it took about 3 months of preparation just to get it all together. And I made sure that when I put the event together that it wasn't just a fashion show. Like, I've seen so many fashion shows get done, and I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of elements of performance, and that the models had just as much fun walking down the runway as the clothes looked, and I wanted them to embody the era. So I asked the Sudbury swing dancers to come in, so they really set the tone for the event. That was just one of the little elements. And then having David Weewell come in with his tintype photography and have like the vibe of like the 1800s, like flash bulbs, sort of like old school vintage like photographs being done at the same time, and then have my sale there. It just like, I made sure that the event with the art installations made sense too, and it came to like fashion history and the Sudbury museum here in town with the library and stuff. They have archives of photographs, and they brought all of that stuff in as well. And
oh, good.
It was really fun. So and it couldn't have gone any better. It was a sold out show, and we were really excited. And that's kind of like what we're going for again with the new pop-up sale that's coming up. It's not going to be a fashion show, but there are going to be little elements of different things happening through the evening that makes you feel like you're not in 2017 anymore. So, yeah.
So actually on that topic then, can you tell us a little bit more about the vintage sale you have coming up? This one's in support of STC. What kind of items are going to be up for grabs at the show?
Yeah, so the Sudbury Theatre Centre got in contact with me after they found a vintage treasure trove of fashion that's been kind of tucked away. They get a lot of donations, and it's happened within, the last 40 years that the theater's been open, and they've been collecting these pieces, and a lot of them haven't even been worn on stage, and some of them have, but a lot of it is just these beautiful vintage pieces, anywhere between, I'd say, the 1930s until around the 80s. So that's where most of the clothing is coming from, is in that kind of era. A lot of it's women's clothing, so there's a lot of like really bold theatrical evening gowns and just normal day wear, casual wear, but there's also a lot of men's clothing. So that was really fun to find, because men's vintage is really hard to come across. So when we found the men's suits and suit jackets and things like that, we were really excited. There's also some accessories and shoes and things like that too. So yeah, and we also have like little like trinkety prop things that are going to be silent auctioned off and things like that as well.
But this isn't the first time you've actually worked with SDC, I believe. You've worked with them a little bit for costuming for different productions. Yeah. How does that kind of work for you?
Well, actually, the most of the costuming stuff has been with the S Theater, but because they perform at the STC a lot, it falls hand in hand in a way. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I have is very bold, and I love theatrical pieces and stuff. So, it makes sense that the things that I'm carrying in my stock goes in with the theater and goes on stage. And I'm always very excited because I love putting together costume pieces and helping them pick. And so that's been really fun. But, yeah, the whole working with the theater is like a dream come true. When they messaged me and said, I want you to come in and take a look, and we were so excited. I couldn't believe that some of the stuff we found, some of the pieces are just so incredible, and they're like one of a kind. You're never going to find a piece like that again, So, and the fact that some of them have never been worn is also impressive. And the sizes are pretty generous too, and a lot of the dresses and things all the way up to some of them are even bigger than a size 14, but definitely all the way up into those ranges of sizes is really exciting to find in vintage, because it doesn't happen very often. So, yeah.
So it sounds like when you're looking for pieces to add to your stock, it's kind of a balance of things that appeal to you versus things that might appeal to a mass of people. Or do you find that sometimes you kind of pick up items and you're like, I have somebody in mind that would really love that?
All of the above, actually. When I'm shopping or when I'm scouting pieces, I think of people that I know that have very interesting taste in clothes, or people have specific stuff. So that's really fun when I do find pieces where I'm I know that person will love it. But a lot of the times too, there's a fine balance of always trying to decide if okay, what's popular now, what's trending, but also like, you know, will it be something that I can sell, or I also, my price points, I always try and make sure, because I'm a thrifty shopper myself, so I always try and make sure I find things that are going to make sense in like the price range category that, you know, most people can shop and feel like they haven't like broke the bank. Unless, of course, like a lot of these theater pieces that we're bringing out, because they're in such great shape and because they're so beautiful and rare to find in the city especially, they're going to be a little bit more not, you know, thrifty finds like the most set sales in the theater is going to usually have. So prepare for that if you're going to come. But it's very fun shopping. Like, that's the best part of the job, is going through and finding things that I want to bring back and make, you know, part of the little vintage family here in Sudbury.
And like, so much fun to bring home, like, just kind of something strange and unique that you found, and then find somebody that just falls in love with it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like sending my little like children away. I'm like, oh, look, you found a new home, yay!
You found
cool.
a forever home.
And it's fun when you get to go out out on the town or whatever, and you see someone wearing the dress that they bought, and they look so good in it, and they love it, and so that's also really like rewarding on my end, is seeing someone put on a dress. I always say that vintage clothing and just the right clothing in particular for a person can give you superpowers, and it really just changes your demeanor and how people see you. So it's always really fun to find that one item that person feels that way in, that gives them that like superhero feeling, you know? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So we have the SDC sale coming up. So what is the date, and where can we get ticket information for this event?
So the date for the sale is going to be November 16th at 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. at the theater, so at the Sudbury Theater Center. And there isn't going to be tickets sold prior to the event. It's a show up, first come, first serve sort of deal. $10 cover at the door, cash only for that. And then, so no tickets, but it'll definitely, I think there'll be a lot of room for a lot of people to show up, and we definitely have a lot of stock to go through. So yeah, there's so much stuff.
So excited. So save up.
Yeah, save your pennies.
Save your pennies and get yourself some goodies.
Yeah, the vintage treasures. There's so many to choose from.
So we are going to be moving on to a little bit of music, and then we will be back very shortly with our next segment, our Creator Conversations, and we're actually going to share a few of our vintage items and talk about them for a minute. We're going to take a little music break before getting into our Creator Conversations and our Hot Jam segment coming up next. What's new on ourcreator.com this week? If you head to the website, you can find a video project we've been hard at work on for a while now. We were lucky enough to get to work with the Art Gallery of Sudbury on an investigation on the hauntings of the manor. We got in touch with psychic Chantal, who was able to channel the spirit of Catherine Bell to find out why she still stays behind in the manor. And the video turned out so well. We got such a great response from Catherine, so we're really, really proud of the outcome, and we hope you go take a look and check it out. Reading on down the page, we also have an update from Latitude 46 Publishing on their latest release, Wolfman Joe Laflamme, Tamer Untamed. If you want to catch up on past episodes, you can always also check out our Creator for our links for our SoundCloud account, where you can find our last week's episode with Alessandro Constantini and our very first edition with Morgan McKee and Lauren Pileggi. So coming up next, we have some music, and I don't know about you when I think about some kind of vintage feeling music from our area, I definitely think of Murder Murder. So we're going to have a song from the title track from their latest album, Wicked Lines and Veins. Following after that, we will have a cover of one of my favorite old tunes, Cecilia by Two Door Cinema Club. Our last one is actually a cover of a Beatles song, Got to Get You Into My Life by Earth, Wind and Fire. Hey, thanks for tuning in to Creator Conversations. I bet you're expecting some music right now. Turns out copyright laws even apply to us. So check below in the description for all the links for the music that we would have played this episode, and you can always follow us on Spotify to keep up to date with our playlists. Now we're going to head straight into our Creator Conversations segment with Starlotte Satine, and we are also going to get a few of her hot jams of the moment to finish out our night. We're back in the studio at CKLU with Starlotte Dresen. She is working right now on a vintage fashion show in support of STC, and you can always look her up on Starlotte Satine Vintage on Facebook, and you'll find all sorts of information about what she's up to and all the different pieces that she's bringing in. But today, what I thought was really fun, because she collects so much vintage clothing and vintage just kind of items, we both kind of brought in little vintage treasures of our own. So I'm going to start with this one. This is something that my grandma gave me a few months ago. And you know how, like, grannies kind of give you things that are, like, useful? So I think I was, like, complaining to her about there was, like, some sort of instance where I could have used a sewing kit, and so she was like, oh, here, take this. And so if I'm going to describe this on air, this the little tin capsule, it kind of looks like maybe like a big, like a horse bill or like a bullet or something.
It's definitely not what I expected it to look like when you mentioned it.
No, exactly.
Like, what is that?
So you pop the top off, and so the lid is the thimble. And then there's like, inside of it, there's this little like wooden spool with some different colors of thread. So when my grandma gave this to me, she was like, it was to sew your stockings if your stocking ripped while you're at work.
Smart.
And then inside of like the little,
capsule.
the lid, yeah, and so inside the little wooden spool has a lid, and then inside is like a little needle. So you could, do your mending on the go. But this is from back when the 40s, when my grandma first met my grandpa. She worked at Bell, and she was like a switchboard operator. So this is actually like from Bell. So it says, tell your friends about good job openings at the Bell. So they didn't call it Bell then. They called it the Bell.
Sounds so much better then.
Yeah. And it says, we need girls in many types of work. In case you're looking for something. So like my grandma gave this to me, and I was like, oh my God, like, where is this from? Like, you know, and to her it wasn't really anything. But I was like, whenever I kind of look at this, I think about like all the stories she told me about working at the Bell, and like how she, you know, how like working at the Bell at that time was such a great opportunity for her, and how, I mean, when her and my grandpa first got married, like, he said he was taking time off to go on his honeymoon, and they basically like, oh, here you go, don't come back on Monday. And so like her job was the only job between the two of them for a second. And she was telling me about like the work environment, and how that you would basically be sitting there in like kind of like a little cubicle. You'd have all the boards in front of you, and your neighbor would be like right next to you, that like if you extended your elbow you'd hit them, but you were absolutely not allowed to acknowledge them or talk to them or even anything. So it's just kind of, anyway, so it's just kind of a little bit of a time capsule of my grandma, because I've only ever obviously known her in like as long as I've existed. So I've only ever known her as like growing up on Manitoulin, so it's kind of like I knew her as somebody who had like was a farmer and like had farmed and owned a farm and had like all these kids and whatever. And so like just the idea that she lived in Toronto and had like this whole other career, like it's kind of like my grandma had this whole other life before anything ever happened. So that's kind of always what I think of when I see this little guy, is that like it's like my grandma's life before her other life started.
I've always been super fascinated by stuff like that, and like, you know, once you grow older and you realize that your parents aren't just your parents, or your grandparents aren't just your grandparents, and they have this whole other life, and that they were young once too, or, you know, like,
yeah,
it's kind of fun to think about it.
It's pretty funny, yeah. And to like hear stories, like my grandma will tell me stories about friends that she had for like 75 years, like for crazy lengths of time, and I'm just like, wow. Like, and I think about the friends that I have, and like what friends that I might be able to say in 50 years that I've been friends with since I was yay high.
Oh my God, imagine. Crazy.
I know. So what did you bring today?
Well, I brought two little things, and they're both from my childhood, and I kind of briefly talked about the other one earlier, but I brought this doll that I have two great grandmothers, and one of them I would go and I'd spend summers with every year. I'm not from Canada. I grew up in the States, and I grew up in Nevada, and my great grandmothers are both in Colorado. And every summer I would go back, and both my great grandmothers always had like a toy trunk full of things that all the kids throughout the generations have been passed down or whatever, and everybody throughout, even through my mom's generation, my grandmother had all played with these toys. So I brought this doll, and it's hand stitched, and it's two-sided. So if I don't know to describe it, it's kind of hard, but she has two heads.
She's got a skirt, and then the skirt flips up.
And she changes outfits, so there's a whole nother body underneath the dress, if that makes any sense. She's very scary to most people, but I think she's very endearing, and it just reminds me of being a kid, and I was always so obsessed with her outfits, and that was partially one of the reasons why I started vintage stuff, is just because of the things that I'd seen it growing up. And my other great-grandmother, this is a classic thing that most people will probably recognize. Well, maybe not people of the younger generation, probably younger than me, but the Oscar Mayer Wiener whistle. And when I went back recently, one of my great-grandmothers passed away, and when I went back, I grabbed a bunch of things that as much as I could possibly fit in my suitcase that meant something to me or whatever. And so I snuck this one from my other great-grandma's house, the little Oscar Mayer Wiener whistle, because that had always been something that, when I'd go to her house to visit, we'd bring those out and I'd play with all the little toys and stuff like that. Actually, my great-grandma, Dresen, she's actually turning 100 November 5th, so she's getting
100.
ready to, a couple days to a milestone here, so that's pretty impressive. So I'm really excited that I've got to know them this long throughout their whole, their entire, that's a whole lot of years to live.
That is.
Years, that's crazy.
Yeah, and think about how all the things that have happened over 100 years,
they've pretty much seen all of history go down.
Really?
For any sort of modern times, history for
when they were born, they might not have had electricity in their home.
No, my great grandmother who passed away 2 years ago, she always talked about when she was a kid going across the states from wherever, I can't remember where she was from originally, but to Colorado in a covered wagon. Cars weren't really even a thing at that point. To me, that's crazy. I'm you pretty much watched the cars be invented, and that's so insane.
And she Oregon trailed across the states.
Yeah, they talked about the covered wagon days. She was born in the late 1800s. She was not born in however many years 100 years ago was. That's insane, right? It's so cool though. They kept everything. Those people from back then, they keep all the things, so it was a history time capsule in her house.
And back in the day, I feel that generation is they got something and they really took care of it, and so that's kind of goes into the vintage clothing idea that all these pieces that you collect, they've been kept and someone's cared for them, and somebody thought they were special enough to keep them in good condition and pass them along all this time.
Yeah, they all have their own story pieces. I think that's partially one of the reasons I'm so fascinated by vintage and finding little treasures like that, is because that they have some sort of history tied into them, or that they meant something to someone, or it's fun to fantasize and think about where did that dress go, and what would that person who have owned it the first time, or whoever, even most of the stuff's handmade from back in the 50s and 40s and stuff. So
somebody made that with intention. Where were they planning to wear that?
I'm making this for my vintage prom. It's so cool. I love that part of what I do very much.
Do you have any items in your stock that you can think of that have particularly have a story that you know?
Not right now. That I don't a lot of the stuff that comes to me is just stuff that someone has been passed down or whatever. I can't think of anything that stands out in particular at the moment. I've gotten some really cool things, and something that I think of right now that doesn't have a really amazing backstory, and it's not it belonged to someone in particular or anything, but I got a Bob Mackie dress in my stock, and that was really exciting because that's Bob Mackie is the designer who designed for Cher and stuff like that. It's not a couture piece, but it is something that's oh my god, this has a Bob Mackie label. So when you find something that's vintage and it's got this amazing label, and that it's tied in with somebody that's super famous, and he used to design for all sorts of people like Diana Ross and stuff like that. So things like that, it's really exciting. But I do love hearing the sentimental sides of things. I don't get it as much lately, but I have had a few people be well, this belonged to my mother and she passed away, and I want it to go to somebody who actually is going to appreciate it. I can't imagine just throwing it out or donating it or whatever. So I do get some stories like that, and and people reach out to me now more than they used to because it's word of mouth, right? People start hearing about it, but yeah.
So let's say you're somebody that is new to kind of experimenting with vintage fashion. What would be some ways to kind of ease into it, to incorporate it into your everyday style?
Well, the good news for those types of people is that fashion recycles itself a lot. So even nowadays, like if you see something new, a lot of the times it's been inspired from a different era. So you can, like, mostly just, we have the internet nowadays, so it's very easy to go online and be like, I need a tutorial on how to dress vintage, and you can like look up something and it'll give you a really great general basic, but I feel like the easiest way to start is to find the one piece that you really love, because even if, like, you don't have to dress like a 1950s pinup girl to be considered wearing something vintage. It can be just like little pieces that get incorporated, that it makes sense, in your daily life. And another great thing about vintage is that even though it's old, a lot of the times the clothes are actually made to wear. So if you do find that one vintage piece, a lot of the times it's like, thing is timeless. It's going to last if you take care of it, So, yeah, I think that's my best advice is that, just kind of do your research, look it up, but to find that one piece that makes sense and what you love. And if you find that one little vintage piece, and just put it in there and rock it.
So we're going to get into our creator conversation questions here. So our first question, this is going to be a really tough one. Who is your favorite Sudburian?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I feel bad because Alessandra already said this, but Jess Crow and Colin Eady are 100% my favorite Sudburians, just because, they do all the Sudbury burlesque stuff, and they work really hard, and they've inspired me a lot in my career to be where I'm at nowadays. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be doing any of the stuff that I'd always dreamed about doing. And they're my mentors. I can call them whenever I need help with any sort of event planning or anything. I'm like, help, I don't know what I'm doing. And they're pretty much like my mama bear and papa bear with a lot of stuff. So
from event planning to relationship advice, they're there for you.
Yeah, pretty much. They're really great and extremely talented, and the hardest working people when it comes to passion projects and making sure people have something new and entertaining to, in the city, and they're just great support systems for sure. So hands down, that's who I choose.
What would you say is Sudbury's signature dish?
Ooh. But I don't know why this popped in my head, and this is probably just because of where I went to school, but I think every time, it doesn't even exist anymore, I don't think. Sub City's greasy pizza. Just because, that's, when I moved here, and I used to,
they're Sub World now. They've upgraded.
Yeah, Sub World, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I think of. I love a good greasy pizza. And
who doesn't?
They do.
Have you ever had a nice big dripper late at night?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. I feel like that's in Sudbury, that's our screeching.
Yeah, it's nostalgic almost. And anytime I eat a really greasy pizza, I just think of high school skipping class and going and having a pizza. I don't know.
You get
the first thing that popped
dipped in Sudbury. You don't get screeched in
I feel bad for all the really great local restaurants because there are really good ones, but that's the one I thought of right away.
That puts you right in the mood for Sudbury.
Yeah.
So our next segment is our hot jam sandwich. So this is a segment where we are going to pick a few of our hot jams of the moment, and we are going to play them all three in a row for you. So Star, what would you say is your hot jam of the week?
So I'm going to probably pick Caravan Palace because they're electro swing. I guess it kind of just goes with the theme. And I'm going to just pick something that I've performed to in the past, and it's called Midnight. It's off one of their most recent albums. Electro swing is really great, and it kind of ties into the new kind of wave of music and also gives that old school vintage swing to it. And I think if I was to choose another one, the Everly Brothers, because I love them and they're timeless and classic too. And All I Do Is Dream is one of my favorite songs, and just so dreamy and fun, and it's just like gets you right back into that old school vibe of like the old era in the 50s, you know.
Well, to kind of keep going with the vintage kind of theme, I think I'm gonna pick something by She and Him. Yeah, I'm not sure which song yet. It'll be a surprise, but I'm gonna pick something by She and Him.
Excellent.
Well, Star, let's plug one more time your STC show. So what is the date, and what are the details that people need to know?
So the STC fundraiser cocktail party is going to be November 16th, 7 p.m. at the Sudburys Theater Center, 7 to 11. First come, first serve, $10 door cover, cash only for that. There are lots of men's vintage, women's vintage, accessories. There's going to be live music, finger foods, a vintage cocktail menu, some live jazz, which is going to be really cool. We're going to have like little mini fashion shows, and it's just going to be a really eventful couple hours of just going through all the vintage that you could possibly imagine existing in the city, and yeah, we're really, really excited about it, and can't wait. I mean, just can't wait to do it. Just want to get it all out there for people to see, because nobody gets to really have this opportunity. I mean, they do set sales here and there, but this is not the same. Like, I hope that people, when they come, they're not expecting like the typical STC set sale that, you know, they normally do, because this is a whole nother level. Like, between the two of us, collaboration, you know, makes sense. Like, we're excited.
Well, and you always say that your events, you want it to be a little bit more of an experience, right? Yeah. So it's like taking the STC set sale that you're used to seeing, and then adding the Starlotte Satine to it.
Yeah, and they're definitely, like, they're going all out. They're making a whole menu for this event, and that's vintagey, and if you want to dress up, you're more than welcome to. That's something that we've talked about, having, like, come dressed up and shop and find some fun things to bring home. And it's the perfect time, like, for the holiday season. Like, if you're shopping for your New Year, the perfect New Year's dress, or like a Christmas holiday dress, there's lots of that to go around, and yeah, we're really excited.
All right, Star. Well, thanks so much for sitting with us, and we hope that you will make your way out to the SDC Vintage Sale. And you can always find Starlotte Satine Vintage on Facebook to keep up to date on whatever she's up to next. And we will talk to you the next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was really great.
And that was the end of our interviews with Starlotte Satine, promoting the Starlotte Satine Vintage Fashion Show. She has our vintage sale she has coming up with STC. So we hope we will see you out at STC, the Valet Lounge, on November 16th. The event starts at 7 and goes till 11. It's $10 at the door, so no tickets in advance, so you better get there early if you want to check out the best selection. Now we're going into our hot jams. So we had 2 requests from Starlotte and then 1 from me, so we will be going into the Everly Brothers with All I Have to Do Is Dream, She and Him, Don't Look Back, and then Caravan Palace with Midnight.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to Creator Conversations. I bet you're expecting some music right now. Turns out copyright laws even apply to us. So check below in the description for all the links for the music that we would have played this episode, and you can always follow us on Spotify to keep up to date with our playlists.
And that is a wrap for Creator Conversations, the 3rd edition here on CKLU. As always, look out for our link on ourcreator.com. We'll be posting our links to the episode on SoundCloud after the fact. And we hope you'll stay tuned in to CKLU, and we'll be back bright and early, 8 a.m. tomorrow morning with CKLU Mornings. This is your co-founder, Jess, signing off for this week. We'll see you again at 10 o'clock on CKLU.